Entire reality is inverted. I'll say that again. Our entire reality is inverted. So, welcome to this very special. I don't know if it's a greater life Twilight Zone kind of show or a sovereign human show. What I do know is that it's been a good while since I went live, and as I go about the process of trying to build this wonderful business that we are building to support entrepreneurs over 50, and at the same time to discover who am I as a father, a parent, a human? Who am I as a member of my community? Who am I in the seeking of a tribe? Then what is it I am called to do? What is it I am called to share? What is it I am called to investigate? And most importantly, what are the gifts that not I think I can bring? What are the gifts that perhaps I have been put here to give? And so this evening, I'm going to share the fruits of the last kind of 6 months or so of research. I've been, particularly in the last 3 months, taking a lot of time to refurbish my house. So I've had a lot of time to listen to podcasts, YouTube videos, ideas. And one of the things I'm realizing is that, particularly with my neurodivergence, that I am essentially a master jack of all trades. And what I mean by that is I have some really diverse areas of interest and fascination. And we only need to look at the what's the word I'm looking for? The blurb that I put together for this show. Where is it? So what are we going to do? We're going to be exploring this evening the shape of the Earth, whether the Earth even exists, why net zero could be the worst idea ever, and how that might connect into why the film Avatar may be revealing far more than we think. There's just some absolutely mind-blowing things I've been coming across around the nature of our realm. And how, for example, simple copper wires could eliminate the need for pesticides and chemical fertilizers, whether human beings even need to eat or drink or sleep. And along the way, we may also touch base with what to do when one of your heroes is wrong, and how all of the above can be used potentially to transform our personal reality and perhaps the future of the world. So that's what's on offer. And if you are watching, wherever you're watching, stick a comment. If you've got any questions as we go through, let me know, because apparently via my live chat thing, I will be able to see the comments when they come through. So do hit us up with a comment. And let me just open up a tab so that I can see. I'm assuming most folks might show up on Facebook. So I will just get a tab open there so that I can see any notifications that come through. There we go. It's also a good way of checking, am I actually live? There we go. Cool. Good. All right. So that is awesome. And there we go. Wow, it's even doing live captions. That's pretty impressive. So no comments yet there. Awesome. Good. So let's kick it off. Okay, let's kick it off. Because I have been, for a long time now, I think I was saying this master jack of all trades thing. I've been wondering why is it that I became so fascinated in topics as diverse as, let's go, urine therapy, the shape of the earth, the nature of religion, the importance of myth, the nature of our human body, and how that connects into health, longevity, potentially even immortality. And also how I became fascinated with, business, entrepreneurship, and leadership, culture, initiation, rites of passage. The list goes on. And the more I sit with all of that, the more it emerges as clear for me that one of my gifts, and it's hard because it's I still have this thing of like, oh no, I can't big myself up, but is the capacity to synthesize connections between a broad, diverse range of things, and from that synthesis to create synergies or to highlight the possibility of synergies. So tonight, and whenever you're watching this, I don't necessarily, I don't claim to have loads of answers. What I do have is loads of questions. And particularly questions in areas where either the science is fixed, the science is dealt with, right? Or areas where we haven't even thought to question. And equally, areas where we're told not to question. And that strikes me as that last one there strikes me as perhaps one of the greatest threats that we have. Because is not the instruction not to ask a question, is that not the equivalent of metaphysical book burning? Saying no, don't ask that question. That don't ask this, don't develop this potential seed of knowledge in the same way, let's burn this book, which is an established piece of knowledge or possibility of knowledge. So in all of what follows, and I don't know how long we'll go for. If you guys want to stick up comments and ask questions, then I will flow with what comes. But I will share a few folks who I've been checking out, the ideas that they've inspired, the questions they've inspired, and we'll see how we riff from there. Okay. Let me just check on the old notifications. Good. There is nothing I think I need to be aware of there. Okay. Good. So let's kick off with what should we go for? First? Let me come back into my studio. Where is that? There we go. And this, of course, also is very exciting. My ability can I work my streaming software? And so I'm going to attempt to share my screen now to show you the first thing that has been blowing my mind. Share screen. Let's go in here. And window is coming here. Wow, where are they? Let's look. Now, first test. Can I get it? Oh, this is interesting. It would seem to suggest not. Let's go. Right. Okay, got you. Okay, cool. So let's come up here and share. There we go. Right. So what I am about to share with you now is the work of a guy called Stellium7. This is his YouTube channel. And he regards himself as a Titanist and as a there we go. Just bring that up. So I realised I wasn't on the screen. There we go. He regards himself, the work of Stellium7, as a geobiologist, and he would also say perhaps a titanologist. The idea that in our past, our realm has been vastly different to the story that's been told. And that when we understand and appreciate the fractal nature of our world, and if you ever want some proof of that, just Google the Mandelbrot set, which is just this amazing experience where you can zoom in and zoom out, and it's this endlessly repeating fractal pattern. That when we look at the size of things here in our realm and their makeup, if we take our viewpoint, our perspective, if we broaden our perspective, what appears to be the case is that our realm was in former times titanic. That is that you had huge trees, hence you can see here titanic trees, right? And that there were also huge creatures and huge beings, huge humans, right? And so if this is the case, which it really appears to be, it calls into question a number of things. One is, of course, that our fairy tales and myths of giants, of huge creatures, of dragons, of beasts, suddenly starts to look more like the echoes of a highly accurate oral history. And when we consider that possibility, we can then sprinkle in things like the training, for example, that the bards of the, back in the Celtic times, the training that the bards and the druids would have to go through. Sometimes it was 20 years long, and they would have to memorize hundreds of hours of oral histories and stories. And it was really exacting. Now, why would you bother with such an exacting training, such an exacting recording of oral histories, if the things that you were recording were A, totally fictitious, and B, of no import? What if the opposite was the case, right? That the accuracy was really important because they were really important, the stories and the tales and the histories and the chronologies. And so the idea here with these, you can see from Stellium 7's channel, is that there were in the past huge, vast trees, huge, vast creatures. And that what we see now in some of our mountain ranges are the remains of those giant trees. And for many people, we've already lost them, because we know that apparently it takes millions of years for wood to petrify into stone. Science on that is not so solid anymore. Okay, we are only now starting to scratch the surface of our understanding of the role that plasma, for example, plays, and indeed to understand the extent to which our historical timeline may not be accurate. I'm going to cover some more on that later. Okay, so Stellium 7 was very inspired by a number of things. He has in his own home turf a huge mountain that looks a lot like a petrified giant elephant. And he is someone who is trained in what's called histology. Okay, and histology is the study of tissues, of living tissues. And so he was able to study the kinds of tissues and the anatomy of an elephant and understand where, for example, veins, arteries, bones, eye sockets, of course, all these things should be. And when he looked at this mountain, he found that there were different types of rocks that corresponded to the different types of tissue within the body. That there were caves where there were eye sockets, or where you would have expected eye sockets to be. Okay, so just some unbelievably fascinating data points that suggested that the petrification of titanic animals, humans, and trees in the past is not such a leap of imagination. Particularly when we then factor in also, and I can just scroll down here. Let me see if there's anything. So this is a series on unveiling a Titan. And we've got these, you see here in this video here that I'm highlighting, that he was, those are the heart stones, and he has found hundreds of these heart-shaped stones. And again, with his background in histology, the study of tissues, he was able to identify that in these stones, there is the exact makeup of what you would expect. So you can see where there's different ventricles and different entrance points for the aortas and the arteries and things, right? And all of this points to something quite unbelievable. A, that our past is far more cataclysmic in nature than our current scientific paradigm has led us to believe. And one of my great heroes, Graham Hancock, has been promoting this possibility for a number of years now, and now gaining some mainstream credibility. Unfortunately, I've recently come to the conclusion that he's pretty wide of the mark on one of the key things he explores, which is the dating of Atlantis. However, what he has done unbelievably powerful work for is to present to the human species the case that our past was not this long, millions of years linear process, but rather has been a series of utterly devastating cataclysms. And that in fact, cataclysms are, I'll just stop sharing and come back into myself here. Cataclysms are far more a part of this realm than we have previously considered. And before I then kind of move on to explore some of the kind of Graham Hancock stuff and what to do when your heroes are wrong and how it links into some of the other things I've been exploring, I want to just share with you as well the work of share screen. So this YouTube channel, a guy called Hangman1128, is a big inspiration of Stellium 7, who I was just referencing. There we go, you can see it now. And you can see here that if you scaled these images down, that what we are looking at potentially is wood that has been petrified. It's just on an enormous scale. And if any of you have watched the movie Avatar, then we know that just the image that you had of the home tree, this enormous tree that towered over the forest and was this source of life and sustenance to the Na'vi, is just, I've spoken to many people, and all of them had a very deep, like visceral response / reaction in that film when the home tree was toppled. And some indeed going as far as saying they shed tears, just openly weeping. And knowing what we know of epigenetics and of morphic fields, the possibility we are left to ponder is whether that experience triggered a kind of like a soul deep memory of a time when our planet was very different and covered in these vast forests of titanic trees. And so the other key piece here, though, is that through the work of Hangman1128, the amount of evidence he has presented in support of this, showing the ways in which these giant petrified rocks are the exact same shape and fractal nature, just on a much bigger scale, as you would expect to see from a piece of wood that, a log that you've got on your fireplace right now. Okay. So this, of course, has been a huge mind blower for me, to consider that the entire nature of our historical reality could have been so different. And it was sparked in no small way by the work of a guy called Jason Brashears, who runs Archaics and the Archaics YouTube channel. And his work focuses on what he calls the Phoenix phenomenon, which is the fact that on a precise mathematical timeline of 138 years, our world is visited by we're not sure at this stage whether it's an object but some kind of phenomenon that will cause devastation and will reset civilizations. And sometimes it is a localized event, and sometimes it is a kind of hemisphere-wide event. And he is someone with a very unique story who spent 20 odd years in prison in Texas and had access to a library, the prison library network of hundreds of old books. And through researching all of these old books and what the people at the time were recording of even older books very often, he was able to piece together a unified calendrical system that took into account the Mayan calendar, the Hebrew long count calendar, the Gregorian calendar, and a host of other different calendars that have been used throughout the ages. And in so doing, in bringing those all together, was able to trace this exact 138-year period when this phoenix phenomenon would occur. And indeed, looking at how the phoenix was spoken about by cultures and known by cultures throughout the world. So that for example, the Mayan, one of the Mayan significant numbers within the Mayan calendar is a multiple of 138. Okay. Similarly, for the Anno Domini calendar, there are in that calendar significant events, multiples of 138. So what this led him to believe and to appreciate, realize, is that by all the research points to the fact that we exist in a simulation that appears to have been hijacked by what the Gnostics would call the demiurge. And that is simply a self-serving entity, right? And so we hear in the Bible, it's almost like we get two gods presented in the Bible. One who is a God who is all love, and one who is like the quote something like, for I am a jealous God, right? Like a God who tries to get someone to sacrifice their son. This is a profoundly inverted, twisted version of what an unconditionally loving God should be. Okay, and so this idea that we are in a simulation is something that is starting to catch on, and obviously folks like Elon Musk have popularized that notion that we live in a simulation. But I think no one has quite captured the data, the long-term historical data, talking about, for example, in the 1500s, showing diagrams of woodcuts from the 1500s that document, that picture objects in the sky that are totally erroneous, like essentially the sky seeming to peel apart and this giant black object appearing that looks like a piece of machinery. It's like the best way that someone from the 1500s would have depicted a piece of machinery that they see in the sky. So all of this leads us to question, what is the nature of our realm? And what are the other data points that perhaps point to the validity of this idea of a phenomenon that resets civilizations through cataclysms? Well, throughout the historical narratives, the phoenix was described as bringing mud red rain and raining red dust down upon the planet. And of course, we look at somewhere like Australia, which is covered, literally covered, in a fine red dust. And you can even find evidence that when you do a chemical analysis of that red mud, that it is very anomalous, that it doesn't appear to, like, they can't pinpoint its origin to anywhere on Earth. And equally, reports of, for example, rivers of frogs or rivers of insects or rivers of fish falling from the sky. And the official explanation for this is that, some wind in the, there must have been a tornado in the Atlantic and it sucked it up and then dropped it, which would be a valid explanation if those, the animals were of a variety of species, right? That if there is literally a river of fish falling on the ground from the sky, and they are all of a single species, and there's no seaweed in there, there's no other life from the ocean, just a river of fish of a single species. That's really hard to contend with in terms of the official explanation that it just got sucked up by a tornado, because a tornado would suck up everything and deposit everything, right? So the possibility that we are in a simulation has, for me, been one of the kind of major shift in my entire way of viewing the world recently. And strangely, it has actually almost strengthened my spirituality, if you like, which is a very, you might think it's weird, that perhaps this, what we might know as a rogue artificial intelligence, and hence with the actual, just I'll share my screen again, the name of the Archaics YouTube channel, the actual name itself means a bit glitchy. There we go. I think the name itself means Advanced Research of the Chronological History of Artificial Intelligence X. So Jason Brashears labeled this rogue element that hijacked our simulation as AIX, X simply being an unknown factor. And to a previous society who perhaps weren't versed in the existence of things like AI, they might have described a rogue AI that with the capacity to reset civilizations as a jealous god, as a demiurge, as a satanic force. And so if our realm of reality, that is the simulation that we exist in, has been hijacked by a rogue AI. And by the way, this is not an uncommon tale that you will hear in the corridors of the kind of super top secret government projects. There are, you come across a lot of quote unquote whistleblower reports that speak to this notion that when the top military brass assess everything, one of the conclusions they come to is that we must be living in some kind of AI simulation, and that there must be some like super powerful AI. So if we do live in a simulation, and as you know, one of the comments just come through there, like, who knows anything, right? How do we then orient towards a meaningful life? It's a fair question. It's a fair question. And I said that this idea that we exist in a simulation has given me a greater sense of spirituality. Because actually, if we look at the work of, right from things like The Secret, which is like perhaps the most surface level sugar-coated version of it, down through the work of folks like Napoleon Hill, Neville Goddard, all of these folks, and on and on and on, right? We're saying that we have the capacity to shape reality as we wish. And so that if we are within a conscious interface with the simulation, it would make sense that we can interface with that simulation and shape the reality we experience. And so that's also been a fascinating area of exploration along with this simulation theory. And to that end, the guy just quoted Jason Brashears through his Archaics channel. He came to the same conclusions that we have the capacity to shape our own personal reality tunnel. And he put that actually into a book called Awaken the Immortal Within. I can just show it up on the screen here now. And he came to the same conclusions as folks like Neville Goddard and Napoleon Hill around the nature of how we can program our reality. And found that to be very, very interesting. And it speaks to, in that book, one of the core ideas that I started this entire live stream on, this idea of reverting reality. That if we exist within a simulation that has been hijacked by a rogue, unloving force, okay, it stands to reason that our reality would be inverted. So let us look at some examples of that then, right? Big one, okay? Carbon dioxide is the enemy. Okay, carbon dioxide is the enemy. We must all strive towards net zero as fast as possible. So I was chatting to my friend who runs a local farm shop, and he was telling me of a company, I think it's in Norfolk, where they were generating a load of excess heat and CO2 from their factory's activities, and it wasn't very cost effective, and they wanted to see what they could do. So they built or put 2 giant polytunnels next to their factory, and they pumped into these polytunnels all the excess heat and all the excess CO2, shifting the CO2 levels within the polytunnels to something like 1600 parts per million, where right now in our atmosphere it's something like 400 parts per million. Don't quote me on those numbers, but the idea being that these polytunnels had significantly more CO2 in them than our current reality, and the tomatoes that were grown there were like in these two polytunnels, they grew the same volume of tomatoes as in like fields and fields would have been required. And so just it really got me thinking, that's interesting. Okay. Because in my past, I've not been shy of diving down the deepest of the deepest rabbit holes. And you may have already worked that out from the nature of some of the stuff we've been exploring here, like giant trees, simulations, right? And so, of course, if you spend any time down any rabbit holes, you come across this idea that there is a, so I think some call it a cabal. I never know quite what word to use, but, there are folk who don't appear to have humanity's best interests at heart for whatever reason, and who will, through the use of particularly mass media, seek to shape the collective consciousness and awareness toward a certain perspective. And so this idea that CO2 is essentially going to cause the death of the planet. Well, the tomatoes don't seem to think so. And I came across the work of a guy called, I'm not even sure of his first name at the moment, a guy called Pacheco, who was this, I believe, a Russian doctor who spent time with people who were dying. And he noticed that as they got towards death, the CO2 levels in their bodies began to drop precipitously. And so he developed this breathing technique that amped up the amount of CO2 within the bloodstream, within a person's bloodstream. And fabulous healings took place, like miraculous healings took place through the use of this breathing technique that amped up the CO2 levels. So the idea being here that we are, the first level of an inversion of our reality is that CO2 is bad. What if the opposite was true? Okay. And what if then our entire cosmology in terms of the shape of the earth is off? Again, if we look at the nature of reality, the toroidal field seems to exist throughout nature, right? And looking at some podcasts recently where folks were looking at some of the science that was being done in the early kind of 1920s, 1930s, many came to the conclusion that we existed in an inverted realm where actually, like, rather than space being out there, that space itself was solid and likely some kind of liquid-based makeup, and that we, in fact, here on Earth, we were in the space. And I'm still getting my head around this one because it's quite recent. But what we know is when we look at the stars, they appear to exhibit the kind of oscillations and pulsations that you would associate with what is called sonoluminescence. And that is where either water is electrified through sound or light and begins to give off light, right? And so if stars were simply stuck in space, why would they be exhibiting in like empty space? Why would they be exhibiting the qualities of sonoluminescence? So there are data points there again that point to like a lot of seriously smart folks who genuinely call into question, maybe they don't know necessarily, but they say, actually, we cannot pin down with absolute certainty that we exist on a globe that is flying at millions of miles an hour through space, whatever space is. And that's the point I know where I probably lose a lot of people as well. But it's like, actually, if we are shamed for questions that we ask, again, like we are kind of tacitly assenting to book burning, essentially, mental book burning. So I have just lost my studio. There we go. Fantastic. So the other key piece of all this is that when we look at the simulation theory piece, here's the crazy one, right? Is that if we exist in a simulation that responds to our consciousness, well, if we believe the Earth is round, we're going to find evidence for that. If we believe the Earth is flat, we're going to find evidence for that. And if we believe the Earth is some kind of like Swiss cheese-based, crystalline matrix, we can probably find some evidence for that as well. So this is the fascinating thing, is that right now, like, everything seems up in the air. But what could this mean in terms of our day-to-day lives? Right, so I've given some pointers on actually shaping our reality. Okay. But I've also been looking at things like, recently, electroculture. So let me show you this. This has been fascinating to discover. So this is, these are plants that are being grown. One on the left is without any copper wire antennae, and the one on the right is with a copper wire antennae. And that is what the antennae looks like on the top of those plants. And so you can see that there is quite a difference in these plants. And so these are being grown with no fertilizer, no pesticides, just with the addition of a copper wire antennae. We can see here, like, that's the start of the broccoli, and then we see the difference is quite profound. Like, yep, there's some same tall, but the kind of the richness, the foliage is significant. And this has been incredible to come across as well, to understand how, we are electrical beings, right? We are beings of, our teeth are piezoelectric, our muscles, our bones are piezoelectric, right? And that prior to the electrification of the planet through first telegraph wires, then radio, then electrical power lines, things like flu were fairly unknown, except at certain times when the sun was doing certain things, i.e. altering the electromagnetic makeup of our realm. And we would then respond to that with an apparent illness. So when we see the impact that electroculture has on plants, we start to understand the impact that perhaps electroculture has on us. And in terms of that being, what is the impact of Wi-Fi? What is the impact of mobile phone signals? What is the impact of the way that our world is so electrified? And if you want to dive into that, it's pretty heartbreaking. An amazing book called The Invisible Rainbow by Arthur Furstenberg, who just maps out the impact on human, animal, and plant life as we as a species have continued further and further down the path of electrification. So that has been pretty fascinating, is to discover that there is both like positive ways of leveraging the electromagnetic spectrum and equally potentially negative. And in this idea of inversion, right now, this idea of positive and negative, we have a world that is run on explosion, right? The internal combustion engine is an explosive thing that creates energy through explosion, right? And yet, when we look at the work of, for example, scientists like Victor Schauberger and others who have advocated, Tesla as well, that implosion was a much greater, much cleaner, much more harmonic way of generating energy. And all of this points to one fundamental truth, is that the way our reality has been inverted is that it has disconnected us further and further and further from nature. That the fundamental life-giving substance of nature, carbon dioxide, has become demonized. And that rather than align ourselves with the forces of implosion technologies, just to give you an example of what I mean by this in nature, there's no way that salmon should be able to swim upstream in the way that they do. And so Victor Schauberger, he quoted the idea that the fish does not swim, it is swum. That is, that it aligns itself with the vortexes, the natural vortexes that are occurring as the water flows, and uses the implosive force of those vortexes to be pulled upstream. So by separating ourselves from nature, and I think there's the Judeo-Christian tradition has got a lot to answer for in that man was given dominion over nature, that throughout the kind of the rise of Christianity, the process of missionaries was to go out and essentially tame the savage tribes and tame the wild and bring it under the ordered auspices of Christendom. And equally, our approach to science, our reductionist materialist approach to science, that has sought to pick apart and understand things by identifying the smallest pieces of a thing rather than understanding the system as a whole. These two, almost like these two bedfellows, the dominion of nature and the reductionist, materialist approach to science, have robbed us of our capacity to engage with the incredible abundance of nature in all ways. Be that the possibility of over-unity energy devices, be that the possibility of materials that, like we know the classic example being, spider webs that, the silk of spiders is, has got a tensile strength proportionally that is greater than steel, right? And yet we now know that spiders seem to use electromagnetic currents to fly across great distances to create their webs. So there is a way, perhaps, that in aligning with nature, we would discover, what's the word I'm looking for? Levitation type technologies or much more effective ways of travel. But there is one more. Let me see how I'm doing time wise and in terms of some of the ideas I wanted to share with you. I think we'll save the kind of the mud floods and the resets and the old archaeology, old architecture that seems to defy genuine explanation when we really dive in. And just finish up with the possibility that what if the ultimate inversion, for whatever reason, is that we don't need to eat or drink or sleep? And I'm yet to get the actual concrete proof of this, but as part of a kind of health group that I'm within, stories have been shared of these folk in Russia who literally are called autonomous individuals. And one of the stories that was shared was one of these autonomous individuals who, live without sleep, without eating, and without drinking, recently swum nonstop for 24 hours across 40 miles across, a freezing Russian lake. And if such examples are true, then it really calls into question so much of what we believe our world to be. And what might it look like if we began to be courageous enough to revert reality, to question everything, to question the nature of how we cultivate our food and whether that is needed, to question what we as human beings are truly capable of, to question the very nature of the reality that we exist in. And if all questions are allowed, and if all questions are honored with the love that is due to you as a unique and sovereign being, like that if you bring a question to the table, genuinely from your heart, going like, actually, well, I don't quite, like, why? I don't get this, why? Like, that should be honored. There's a sacred thing. So if we could bring back the capacity to ask questions as a sacred thing, well, then what might be possible? And in the examples that I've shared tonight, I hope that I've planted a seed or two, perhaps for you to go and check out the work of Stellium 7 or Hangman 1128 and explore the idea of whether, huge trees could have existed in our ancient past. To look at the work of Archaics on YouTube and explore whether there is a strong case for the fact that because of the mathematical precision of certain world events on a recurring timeline across centuries, it would appear that we do exist in a simulation of some nature. And perhaps do some research into electroculture. That if you have a garden and you would want to see your plants be more hardy against disease, be more resistant against pests, and bring a greater yield, all without needing to invest in manure and compost and fertilizers and all that stuff, Okay. Electroculture might be a place to begin having a look. All right. And finally, what if, whether you decide to explore the need to eat or drink or not, right? Like, less about that, but what if, in the examples I've shared, like that we have been sold narratives that fundamentally are designed to inhibit our true realization of our true potential? What if you allowed yourself to dream into the reality that you are an infinite, immortal being? And that if you know you can experience something, that it is a must, that you must experience that. All right. Some things to consider. And wherever you're watching this, whenever you're watching, hit me up with a comment. Let me know your thoughts. Let me know your feelings. It's a little kind of freestyle episode, and I'm going to explore doing more of these. And if you've got any questions from anything that's thrown up, ping me a message, and I'm happy to share more resources with you in a more formal fashion. All right. Lots of love.